If I told you that one of Nazi Germany's most famous fighter aces, Adolf Galland, once strapped himself into an American P-51 Mustang and came back saying its dive speed was unbelievable, you'd probably think it was some forgotten Hollywood script. But it wasn't. It happened. And the story behind it is full of tension, fear, and a strange moment of honesty between enemies in the skies over Europe. Let's dive in. The winter sky over occupied Europe was the color of steel, cold, unforgiving, and sharp. Allied bombers had been pounding German cities for months. American Mustangs were showing up in places once thought unreachable, escorting bombers far beyond what the Luftwaffe had believed possible. And in the middle of this chaos stood Adolf Galland. He was already a legend within the Luftwaffe, confident, charismatic, sometimes rebellious, and known for speaking his mind even when it got him in trouble with the Nazi high command. But on this particular day, he was about to face something he was not used to, flying the enemy's best machine, a captured P-51 Mustang. The moment he walked up to it, the German ground crew said he stopped cold for a second, staring at the long nose, the elegant wings, and that unmistakable bubble canopy. Even without its American markings, the Mustang looked like trouble. It had already proven itself across Europe. Fast, long-ranged, and deadly. Galland walked slowly around it, running his hand along the wing like someone studying a wild animal before deciding whether or not it bites. One of the mechanics joked, "Her general, if this machine shoots you down, at least it will be one of the best." Galland didn't laugh. This wasn't a joyride. The German high command wanted to know why the Mustang was giving them so much trouble. Why their own fighters, Bf-109s and Fw-190s, were being chased down at altitudes where American planes shouldn't even be. So Galland did what good pilots do. He climbed into the cockpit himself. The first thing he noticed was the simplicity. The switches were cleanly arranged. The controls made sense. The visibility was incredible. He could see everything forward to the sides behind. He later joked that in many German fighters, you flew half blind and hoped God handled the rest. Inside the Mustang, he felt something different. He felt free. He tightened his harness. The canopy slid shut with a smooth metallic click. He pressed the starter. The Packard-built Merlin engine, an American-made version of the famous British Rolls-Royce design, came alive with a deep, confident growl. It didn't roar. It hummed, like a machine built for purpose, not for intimidation. Galland eased the Mustang forward. Even on the ground, he could feel the difference. It wasn't fighting him. It wanted to fly, and he wanted to see what it could really do. Moments later, the Mustang clawed into the air, lifting from a German airfield that only weeks earlier had been attacked by aircraft just like it. Galland took it higher. Higher. Higher still. Europe stretched out beneath him like a massive gray battlefield, scarred by smoke trails and distant flashes of anti-aircraft fire. He leveled out, wiping a thin layer of frost from the inside of the canopy. Time to test it. He pushed the throttle forward. The Mustang leapt. Not surged, leapt. Like it had been waiting all day for someone to simply say go. Galland wasn't easily impressed. He had survived dogfights that should have been impossible, had flown through burning aircraft debris, had seen close friends vanish in explosions so bright they left spots in his eyes for days. But this was different. The Mustang held its speed like it didn't care about air resistance. The nose stayed steady. The wings stayed smooth. And then came the moment he would talk about for years. He rolled the Mustang onto its side, tipped its nose downward, and pushed it into a full power dive. The acceleration hit him instantly. The wind screamed across the canopy. The altimeter spun like it was losing its mind. He was diving faster than he had ever dived in a German fighter. He expected shaking. He expected buffeting, frame shudder, warning signs. Nothing came. The Mustang remained rock solid. No rattle, no panic, no vibration threatening to tear the wings off. It cut through the air like it had found a secret tunnel hidden inside the sky itself. Unbelievable, he muttered to himself. And that wasn't just a passing thought. He would later repeat it publicly, almost proudly. Its dive speed, unbelievable over Europe. Galland pulled out of the dive with a long, controlled sweep, feeling the G-force press him deep into the seat. But the Mustang handled it smoothly, almost politely. He caught his breath, and for the first time, he felt a strange sensation. Respect. Respect for the machine. Respect for the men who built it. Respect for the pilots he had been fighting for months. He circled back toward the field. His mind was racing faster than the airplane. The Mustang was more than just a well-designed fighter. It was a message Germany had not wanted to hear. We've built something better, and we're coming. Galland touched down smoothly, taxied to a stop, and shut off the Merlin engine. As the propeller slowed and the cockpit filled with silence, he just sat there for a moment, breathing hard, replaying the dive in his mind. He climbed out. A crowd of officers and engineers rushed toward him. "Well," one asked, "what did you find?" Galland exhaled slowly, wiped frost from his gloves, and said something they weren't expecting. "Is the best we have faced." The men stared at him, unsure whether he was joking, exaggerating, or betraying German pride. But Galland wasn't done. He held up 2 fingers. "Two things," he said, "speed and range. We cannot match either." For a brief moment, even the air seemed to fall silent, because those 2 things were exactly why German fighters were struggling. They could not chase the Mustangs. They could not outrun the Mustangs. They could not avoid the Mustangs. Galland knew the truth, and now, so did everyone standing there. He walked away from the aircraft slowly, hands behind his back, his mind still stuck in that dive. He knew what it meant for the war. He knew what it meant for his pilots. And deep down, he knew something else. The Mustang wasn't just a fighter plane. It was the beginning of the end. But what Galland didn't know was that the Mustang's growing dominance was about to collide with his own frustrations inside the Luftwaffe, leading to one of the most dramatic confrontations of his career. If you've ever wondered what it feels like when a pilot realizes the enemy has finally built a machine his own country can't match, stay here. Because after Galland landed that Mustang, the skies over Europe and the halls of the Luftwaffe were about to erupt with tension he never saw coming. The air was biting cold that evening when Galland stepped into the dimly lit briefing room. Cigarette smoke hung low like fog inside a forgotten bunker. A dozen officers stared at him, waiting for words none of them actually wanted to hear. On the wall behind him, a chalkboard map showed Germany's shrinking defensive perimeter. Airfields that once protected the Reich now sat under constant bombing. Red arrows, Allied bomber routes, pushed deeper every week. Galland rubbed his forehead. He looked exhausted. Not physically, he had survived worse, but mentally. He knew he was about to speak the truth to men who didn't want truth. They wanted comfort. They wanted denial. He began talking slowly, deliberately. The Mustang is superior in ways we cannot currently counter. You could feel the discomfort ripple through the room. One officer slammed his fist on the table. "Nonsense. Our 109s can outclimb it. Our 190s can outturn it." Galland interrupted him. "Not anymore. Not at altitude. Not with their range." And in a dive, he paused, remembering the moment the Mustang fell like a stone yet felt like silk. In a dive, it is something we have never seen. The officer scowled but didn't argue again. Galland walked to the chalkboard and drew a single line, stretching from England across the North Sea, deep into Germany. "This," he said quietly, "is their reach now." Gasps muttered across the room. He wasn't exaggerating. The P-51 could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. That meant Germany no longer had a sanctuary, nowhere to rest, nowhere to regroup. "They can chase our fighters home," he added. "They can attack our airfields. They can stay in the fight for hours." Another officer whispered, almost in disbelief, "How can they fly so far and still fight like that?" Galland didn't answer. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Germany's advantage in the skies had reversed, and the men who had once been the hunters were becoming the hunted. Later that night, Galland walked alone across the airfield. Snow crunched beneath his boots. In the distance, mechanics worked under floodlights, repairing the few operational fighters left. He paused beside the captured Mustang again. Even in the darkness, its shape looked menacing, sleek, confident, like a creature that didn't fear the cold or the war or the men who stood in its way. A fellow pilot, Werner Veitai Mulder's old friend, approached him quietly. "You really think this aircraft changes everything?" he asked. Galland nodded. "It already has." They stood there in silence, their breath freezing in the air. They had flown together for years, survived countless missions. But this moment felt heavier, like a truth too large to ignore. "Then we need to build something better," the pilot said. Galland let out a dry, bitter laugh. "That's the problem. Our leaders refuse to listen." And this is where the story turns from aviation to conflict, not in the skies, but inside the German command. The Luftwaffe needed newer, faster, more advanced fighters. Pilots were begging for it, Galland especially. He had pushed for the continued development of the Me-262 jet fighter, convinced it could change the war. But instead, political interference, specifically from Hitler himself, forced the jet into a bomber role. A bomber jet, against formations escorted by P-51s. Galland wasn't just angry. He was furious. But fury in wartime Germany was dangerous. Very dangerous. A week after his Mustang test flight, Galland was summoned to Berlin. He entered a large, echoing hall inside the Reich Air Ministry. The stone floors amplified every step like a courtroom. Officials seated behind long tables turned to watch him as he walked in. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, sat at the center. He looked irritated, tired, and defensive, like a man who knew he was losing control but refused to admit it. "Galland," Göring said with a cutting tone, "I've been informed that you've been spreading defeatist opinions about the American Mustang." Galland stared at him, unblinking. "It is not defeatism to state the truth," he replied calmly. "Our pilots are dying because we pretend everything is fine." The room went tense. Göring leaned forward. "Our fighters are superior. Our pilots are superior. The only reason we struggle is because the bomber crews cheat." Galland almost laughed, because this was the same nonsense many German commanders repeated to ease their own egos, that Allied gunners were cheating, using illegal sights or coordinated fire patterns. "That's not true," Galland said, his voice rising. "They are better trained. Their aircraft are better designed. And the Mustang." Göring slammed his hand down. "Enough about that damn Mustang." A silence, so sharp it felt physical, hit the room. Galland took a breath, steadying himself. "Sir," he said softly but firmly, "the Mustang is the reason we are losing the skies. Ignoring it won't save us." One officer whispered to another, "He's going to get himself arrested." Another muttered, "He's right, but he shouldn't say it." Göring leaned back, eyes cold. "You are becoming a problem, Galland. Your negativity, your criticism, your obsession with this American plane." Galland cut him off, something no one else in the Luftwaffe would have dared. "I have an obsession with winning." Gasps erupted. Göring stood, face red. "You forget your place." Galland didn't move. "Then send me back to my pilots. Let me fight. Let me command the frontline units." But Göring didn't want solutions. He wanted obedience. "You will do as ordered," Göring snapped. "And you will stop praising the enemy's aircraft." Galland's heart pounded, not from fear. He'd faced death countless times, but from disgust. He saluted stiffly and left the chamber, footsteps echoing like cannon blasts through the hallway. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. He finally exhaled, the breath he had been holding since he challenged the second most powerful man in Germany. He knew then that something inside the Luftwaffe was broken beyond repair, and that the Mustang wasn't just beating them in the air. It was exposing every weakness on the ground. The next months would push Galland to the breaking point, politically, personally, and militarily. And the tension between him and Göring would build to a dramatic clash so explosive it nearly cost him everything. But the story isn't over. Because just when Galland thought he had reached his limit, a new chapter began, one involving a rebellion among fighter pilots and the creation of an elite German unit built to challenge the Allied air forces head-on. If you could freeze the sky at the exact moment a pilot reaches his breaking point, you'd see Adolf Galland standing right there, caught between duty, pride, and the crushing truth that the war was slipping away. And the worst part? It wasn't slipping because of his pilots. It was slipping because nobody in command wanted to listen. But fate was about to give him one last chance, a chance wrapped in rebellion, forged by anger, and fueled by pilots who refused to die quietly. The winter deepened. Germany's skies grew darker, heavier, almost haunted. Allied bombers were no longer just visitors. They were a daily storm. And the Mustangs that escorted them seemed to multiply, appearing in the clouds like wolves protecting a herd. Inside Luftwaffe fighter bases, morale hit rock bottom. Pilots were exhausted. Fuel was scarce. Aircraft were being destroyed faster than they could be repaired. And yet, one thing kept spreading through the fighter wings. Galland's honesty. They'd heard he flew the Mustang. Heard what he said about it. Heard how he'd fought Göring to defend them. To the pilots on the front lines, Galland wasn't a general anymore. He was a lifeline. One evening, in a cold barracks lit by a single flickering lamp, a group of high-ranking German fighter aces gathered. These were not rookies or desperate men. These were the most experienced pilots Germany had left. Hartmann, Steinhoff, Lutzow, and others whose names still echo in aviation history. They were angry. They were frustrated. And they were tired of watching their friends die while being told everything was fine. Joseph Pips, Priller, finally spoke up. We can't win like this. Not with the orders we're being given. Not with the lies in Berlin. Steinhoff nodded. Galland is the only one who understands what we face. Another pilot murmured. He's the only one telling the truth. And then came the moment that changed everything. What if, Lutzow whispered, we stand together, not as subordinates, but as a united fighter command? The room froze. It wasn't mutiny. It wasn't treason. But it was damn close. They were planning a confrontation with Göring, a demand for change, for honesty, for leadership that actually understood the air war. And at the center of it would be Galland. When Galland learned of their plan, he didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He looked tired, deeply tired. This will not end well, he warned. We know, Lutzow said, but it must be done. And so the fighter pilots, aces with hundreds of kills, marched into Göring's headquarters and tried to tell the truth. They demanded better aircraft, better strategy, more autonomy. And most of all, they demanded that someone competent lead the fighter force. Göring erupted. He yelled, threatened, insulted them. You dare question me? He shouted. I should have every one of you shot. Galland didn't speak. He stood in the back of the room, jaw clenched, staring at the floor. Because he knew exactly what was happening. The rebellion failed. And Göring's revenge came swiftly. One by one, the pilots were reassigned or sidelined. And then it happened. Göring summoned Galland alone. You are relieved, he said sharply. Your command is over. Your influence ends today. Galland didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply saluted, turned, and walked out. This was the lowest point of his military career. Humiliated, removed from command, punished for telling the truth. But history is funny. Sometimes the darkest moments hide a spark. Because not long after this, a new opportunity emerged, one born out of desperation. Germany needed something dramatic, something radical, to counter the unstoppable Allied air power. They needed a specialty unit, an elite squadron of the best surviving fighter pilots who could fly the latest technology, including the Me-262 jet. And despite everything that had happened, there was only one man qualified to lead it, Adolf Galland. When the order reached him, Galland didn't laugh or gloat. He simply nodded, understanding what it meant. He was being brought back into the war, not as a bureaucrat, not as a political figurehead, but as a fighter pilot, the way he always wanted. The unit would be called Jagdverband 44, JV-44 for short, a name whispered today with an almost mythical tone, the squadron of experts. Its pilots were some of the greatest aces to ever fly. Men with incredible records, men with nothing left to lose, men who wanted one final chance to fight on their own terms. Galland walked into the hangar for the first time and saw them standing in formation, these battle-scarred veterans waiting for him. One pilot grinned. We heard you flew a Mustang. Galland smirked back. Only once. It was enough. The men laughed, tension dissolving into camaraderie. And waiting behind them, inside the hangar shadows, sat the future. The Me-262 jet fighter. Twin engines. Swept wings. A speed that made Mustangs look slow. At last, Galland had a machine that could challenge the Allies. But it was too little. Too late. Germany's factories were being bombed daily. Fuel barely existed. The jets suffered mechanical issues. Maintenance crews worked in freezing temperatures just to keep a handful operational. Yet Galland and his pilots flew anyway. They fought Mustangs, Thunderbolts, Lightnings, Spitfires, every Allied fighter in the sky. And when Me-262 worked, it was terrifyingly fast, almost untouchable. Galland himself scored victories even in those final months, streaking past Allied formations in a blur of jet exhaust and desperation. But fuel shortages, Allied air supremacy, and a collapsing nation made victory impossible. JV-44, for all its skill and courage, could delay the end but not stop it. And the Mustang, the aircraft Galland once called unbelievable, remained a dominant force until the war's final days. Years later, long after the guns fell silent, long after the skies over Europe calmed, Galland spoke openly about the Mustang. He never hesitated, never softened his words, never changed his story to protect pride or reputation. The P-51, he said, was the finest fighter of the war. When I flew it, I knew the truth. And every pilot on both sides knew it too. There was no bitterness in his voice, just respect. One pilot acknowledging the brilliance of another nation's machine. A machine that changed the war. A machine that changed him. Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of the most fascinating stories from the air war in World War II. If you enjoyed this cinematic-style history breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what story you want next. There's so many hidden tales like this, and together we can bring them back to life.